What up, family? CTR Media Network. Yeah. Best in the biz. Yeah. Join the team. CTR is who we are, the media network, that's the best by far. Whether you listen at your home, at your job, in your car, come get the information that's needed above par. Never lasting, motivational podcasting, giving you the answers to the questions that you're asking. Serious talks and topics, how to come up and profit, how to better yourself, your health is here, we got it. Reaching 350 million, they tuning in. We in 50 different countries, we all can. And like minded, find your purpose and your assignment. Come get your fix, your feel, your mental alignment. Get active and speak to the masses. Build your influence, all levels and all classes. Now you know you can monetize and grow. CTR Media Network, start the show.
The Vera Tommy Show. The Vera Tommy Show. The Vera Tommy Show. The Vera Tommy Show. Let's talk about it. 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 On the Vera Tommy Show. Let's talk about it. Yeah.
Hello. I'm so glad to see you all today. I am so excited, but every week I'm excited, right? Yes, I am. Every week I'm excited. I'm excited about my guest today, Miss Rose Hamilton, and she has an AKA because she is a poet. Hi, Rose. How are you today?
Really good.
That's
Really good.
great. I'm going to start by sharing your bio. Rose Hamilton has been writing poetry and prose since her first haiku in 4th grade. Since then, she has lived and worked in 19% of the countries of the world, staving off boredom as a classical musician, nutritionist, tourist, consultant, conference organizer, paralegal for refugee cases, sailing on wooden boats and events as a writer and editor, a proud grandmother, and unrepentant Red Sox fan. She now lives on a farm in the Canadian Maritimes. For news, links, and to order copies of this and other books, you can go to radapress.com, and we'll talk more about that. And I know I botched that up. I know that you have your AKA. I was afraid to even say it. So share with our audience what your AKA is and what it means.
Well, my pen name is R.A. Ruoth, and Ruoth is a Scottish Gaelic for redhead.
Okay, and you're a natural redhead.
I'm a natural redhead, born and bred and temper to match. And so that's why I chose that, to kind of, give it its own space.
Awesome.
And right now my books are available through other sources than my own press, but that may change.
Yes. Well, what I want to do, I'm going to give you the floor and let you share with our audience a little bit about who Rose Hamilton is, your journey, and how it is that you are now living your dreams and your passions and doing all the works, the great works that you're doing.
Okay. Well, let's see. I started in New Jersey, Elizabeth, New Jersey, which at the time in the late 50s was probably the most polluted place in the country. I was born less than a mile from where they invented leaded gasoline in inhaled paint factory fumes and all the rest. So the EPA was a great thing to happen. And when I was about 6 or 7, we moved to New England. So I grew up north of Boston and eventually went to school 1 year at the University of Toronto, and then came back and went to school in Boston. And it was hard. I got a music degree with a minor in journalism, and it was hard to get work as a musician. So a lot of us went overseas, and I ended up getting a job in the Netherlands in an orchestra there. And from there, started freelancing around Europe and doing touring and things like that. And eventually that dried up as governments changed their ideas about funding the arts. We've all been through that.
Yes.
And I used my journalism skills. And I worked as a magazine editor and writer for many years, and got interested in sailing old boats because I think the statistic in the Netherlands is that 1 in every 3rd person has a boat. And a lot of them are these beautiful old wooden gaff rigged boats that they used for work and fishing and so on. And then one thing led to the other. I ended up moving to Denmark and working on cross-border European Union tourism infrastructure projects, sustainable tourism, maritime heritage. Really loved that. And then 9/11 happened, and that kind of gutted the tourism industry for a while. So I went back to something that I'd always been interested in and loved, and got a degree in nutrition. As you can see, I keep following my nose, and my nose, it's always leading me into trouble. And so I worked as a nutritionist. I had my own health food store. And then my daughter had announced when she was about 11 years old, she wanted to go to college in the States. And I said, okay, all you need to do is find a money tree because we ain't rich. And but she ended up part of the Danish public school system is the IB program, the International Baccalaureate, which most places you have to pay a fortune for. And so she did her IB, and she got into some good schools and ended up going to George Mason University. And at that point, I ended up with work in Canada. So I moved to Canada and worked as a consultant, doing community engagement on some really interesting projects to do with nutrition. And I worked with First Nations, and I worked with tribal education departments down in the States, and doing workshops and presentations on nutrition, particularly for kids with learning and behavioral issues and neurodivergence, because nutrition can help a lot. I don't see neurodivergence as a problem per se, but it can make it hard to concentrate. It can, make it hard to kind of fit in and things like that, because your brain is controlling you instead of you being in control of your brain. And so one of the things that can really help is good nutrition. And so I worked with that. I worked at SOS Children's Villages in BC. They're part of the worldwide SOS Children's Villages around the world, which was a fantastic experience. But all along, I've wanted my own little place, and I've wanted to live on a farm because I grew up rural. And once we had left New Jersey, and I still wanted to be there. So I moved to the Maritimes. So I went all the way across the country from Vancouver all the way to Nova Scotia. And now I live on a farm. And it's not my farm, but I'm learning a lot and enjoying it and saving up for my own little spot in the world.
That's amazing. Now, the topic of our show today is poetry, pie, piglets, and politics. And I know you are a poet, and we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. And I'm really interested in the nutritional piece that you've done with youth and looking at their diets and their behavior and how those things tie in together. That's very important. And parents don't realize a lot of times that the behavior problems or the academic issues are a direct result of diets.
Yeah.
And so I really do want us to talk about that. But we're going to start our first topic of discussion with one of your poems.
Okay. I'm going to start with one that's from my book, Silence of the Bells. It's a little bit of a tough poem, because even though I live on a farm and, my daily life has a lot to do with, feeding the chickens and things like that, I'm also very aware of what goes on in the world. And with the war in Ukraine, I saw these photographs of the fields and, the missiles that had landed there. And it literally struck me. This one's called Sow and Reap. While I check in on the war from my farm, geese vie for dominance with the thump of faraway missile strikes in another time zone. I write poetry about blood, the agony of mothers splattered across the page from my safe place, looking out on fields with grazing cows. A thundering bomb cyclone is no warning of annihilation, merely blowing rain. This spring, my hoe will turn over stones and clay, making way for potatoes. Farmers in that other time zone will look at rows of tank tracks, plowing a field where only bones and artillery shells break into the sun. No matter how loudly the rooster crows, he cannot drown out a mother's weeping or the silence of blood-soaked baby blankets.
Oh my God. That is beautiful. And it is heartfelt because war is so devastating. And what's going on in Ukraine, we need to, pray for those families in that country and all the things that are going awry, all because of power and someone wanting to control that which does not belong to them.
Yep. Yeah. And Ukraine produces about a quarter of the world's grain supply. I mean, it's a big, big deal. And so we hurt the land with that. So that was just sort of my connection to that, from my piece of land here.
Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And let me say, this broadcast is going to be aired several times on several podcasts, including iHeart, and I just got on Apple. And so I'm really excited that my show is expanding.
That's
and
fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. I just got that news today, as a matter of fact. So I'm really excited about that. Now, when you said pie and piglets and politics, let's start with the pie.
Okay, well, that's the nutrition part. And I love to cook. I come from a family where our saying is, the kitchen is the heart of the family, and the books are its soul. So these two things are always
that.
Yeah, and so that's always dear to me. So.
And so unfortunate. It's so unfortunate that anymore, when you said the kitchen, so many families are not eating together anymore.
They don't know how to cook, and they don't know where their food comes from. And one of the interesting things that I learned, I go out there to teach and give workshops on childhood nutrition, but I learned a lot too. And one of the things I learned is that, especially if someone grows up in a troubled situation where, they don't have a good family life and stuff, and nowadays, even if they do, they never learn to cook. And I've done, workshops with people who said, well, I've seen zucchini or eggplant in the supermarket, but I have no idea what to do with them. So they don't buy them, and then they don't cook them. So giving cooking lessons is important. But one of the things that I have learned as a nutritionist is that if a kid eats a lot of really high glycemic foods, which includes all those supposedly good cereals for you, because cereals are really high glycemic, they'll get a big sugar rush, and then they get a sugar crash. And we all know when kids get hungry, they get really ratty. And I would go into my workshops, Indian health conferences and education conferences and stuff. And I'd say, okay, what happens in your classroom at 10 o'clock? And the whole room would just die laughing, because they knew. So we would talk through, and what I learned was that what was subsidized for food, for schools, they were not allowed to give kids any reasonable amount of protein until the afternoon. It was all cereals and things like that, and it was just like, well, these kids are just seesawing all day. And one of the things about high glycemic foods is that they basically set up the addiction process in your brain. Things like high fructose corn syrup act the same way in your brain as heroin. So you also go through withdrawal when you don't get a hold of it. And we're doing this to kindergartners. So even if you didn't have ADHD or anything, you'd probably act like it on a diet like that. So we had some really interesting conversations about what to do about this, because they were actually forbidden to give children any kind of protein before lunch, except I think it was 2 or 3 times a week. And
now, is this in the United States?
This
or?
was in the United States. And this was like, they could give the kid a hard-boiled egg. Boy, that's really appetizing. So they're all going to look like, oh, and what happens is when you don't get variety of food, your taste buds drop off your tongue. And everything tastes bad except for sweet and salt. And
both of which are poisons to our system.
If that's all you're eating, yeah. I mean, we're primed to need them, but that's a whole nother, bit of science I won't go into now. But so getting kids to eat better food, not only you have to have it available for kids, but then you got to get them to eat it. So how do you do that? Gardening.
How do you do that?
Involved in growing their own food, and then learning how to cook it, prepare it, and present it and share it. And it's amazing when kids have grown their own food, they feel like providers instead of problems. And it's a great way to teach stuff. You can teach math, by figuring out how big the garden is and by counting how many tomatoes you picked and, measuring stuff for recipes. And for kids who learn visually, and I'm one of them,
Me too.
And I have to have my hands on it. I have to see it. Algebra doesn't work for me. This is a great way for learning. So it's, so I had a lot of fun learning from people. And what we did was we started working, and particularly for Indian health, the issue was what they were and weren't allowed to do. And after some conversations, I had a kind of a bell went off in my head, and I said, well, what if you pull the tradition card? They won't touch traditional foods if you want to offer them. Because the other thing that's really good for you is to go back to your genetic traditional foods, because that's what your body was primed for thousands and thousands of years, for that complex of nutrients, that profile. And when you don't get that profile of nutrients, your body's going to get like deficiency diseases and stuff, even though technically you're not deficient. Because, if you're Coast Salish, First Nation from up in Canada, 75% of your diet traditionally was salmon.
Ooh, and
if you don't get those fatty acids and those minerals, you're going to be sick.
And speaking of salmon, I love salmon. I could eat salmon every day.
Because that's the kind of thing, yeah.
And it's nutritional. It's so nutritional. Right.
And for some people, a little is a lot. And for some people, a little is not enough. So it pays to kind of research in your background. Of course, most of us nowadays, we're not just like, one kind of genetic profile, because we've got a little of this and a little of that in us. But experiment around and say, okay, well, my ancestors, say from Scotland, ate lots of herring, or my ancestors from China ate lots of rice, or, whatever it is. Go back and discover what were the foods that you would have eaten 500 years ago.
Now you say that, but like for African Americans, that's a hard
It's a
thing.
hard one.
It is a hard one, because what we grew up on, even though I must say the foods that were traditional foods back during slavery and those kinds of times, were still healthy foods like greens and
Greens and root
potatoes.
vegetables and things like that. And a lot of those foods were actually brought over from Africa.
Okay.
Things
See, I
like,
didn't know that.
yams. Yeah, yams and sweet potatoes and things like that, and eating those kinds of greens. It would have been cassava probably over in Africa, but there were also yams and things like that. So it was closer, and you were closer to the source. It hadn't been all processed and canned and, grown on nutrient deficient soil and all that kind of stuff. So it was still a better deal. So then what you have to do is say, okay, well, I'll try this, but take out all of the highly all the processed stuff. Go back. People say, well, how should I eat? And I said, well, if that ingredient doesn't look like you just caught it, dug it up, plucked it from a tree, shot it, fished it up, don't eat it.
Right. And if you can't pronounce the words on the label.
Yep. If it looks like something you would sniff, don't eat it. And that puts you very much back to nature and teaching kids where food comes from. Jane Goodall went around in her school food programs, and she was doing a lot of research, and she was talking to little kids in Nebraska, farm kids, who did not know that potatoes came from the ground, because the fields in Nebraska had become so nutrient deficient and so full of pesticides and everything else like that. People no longer grew food in their backyards the way they used to. They bought it at the supermarket. There's something really wrong when a farm kid doesn't know where potatoes come from.
That's a sad commentary.
Yeah. So getting back to, and once you connect with those roots, once you connect literally with the earth, that changes your whole perspective of things, because now you're dealing with connections. You're dealing with networks, whether they're root networks or whether they're networks in your community helping grow vegetables. All of a sudden, you've got community that includes the earth and includes systems and holistic ways of looking at things. And it doesn't take a lot of land. There's a I think it's a 2.5 acre community garden project in the middle of Detroit. And it feeds something like 2,500 families. Yeah, even I was like, whoa, what are they doing? But everybody benefits from it. And they don't just benefit by the food. They benefit from learning how to preserve it, learning how to save seeds, getting together around a table, getting out there in the sun and in the dirt, all of those things.
And so, just think, Rose, if we went back to doing that kind of stuff, number one, we wouldn't have time to deal with all this negative stuff that's going on in our country and all this negative energy that's going on. Because if you got your hands in the soil, now I'm not one for digging in the dirt. I admit it. Both my sisters, they loved getting their hands in the dirt and gardening and
but you
all
can
that
get in
stuff.
the kitchen and cook it. I mean, everybody's got a part in it.
Everybody's got a part.
But the other thing is that, then you still have your cell phone, but you use it to look up and say, okay, when should I plant the seed? Instead of sitting there doom scrolling. And kids come home from, working at the community garden, and they're honestly tired. So they sleep better. And they've been with other kids and they've done something useful. Like I said, it turns them from a problem into a provider. And it sounds really simplistic, but I've been involved with community garden projects and school garden projects, and it's flabbergasting, the effect. It's just fantastic.
That is wonderful. And not only are you teaching kids how to take responsibility for what they're eating, but you're also giving them an opportunity to really focus on something productive versus the other kinds of things that they may find themselves getting into. And I think that's beautiful. And the fact that there are so many food deserts in our country, in communities having these 2-acre plots of land where community can come together. And I know there are efforts here in Georgia to do that kind of stuff. I'm not
And you
involved.
can use vacant lots. You can make raised beds out of, just go to the local, big hardware place and beg off some pallets from them and take them apart and put them back together. And you've got raised beds and get donations of dirt. And I mean, there's so many things that can be done. And when people have to work together to get that done, and all it takes is a corner. You can do it on the verges, between the sidewalk and the road. There's so many places you can put garden. In 1 square meter, you can grow enough for a whole family.
That's beautiful. And that's the kind of work that you've been doing. And that is just amazing. That is amazing. And I know that, oh man, you've got such a wealth of information. And I know you talk about nutrition, because before we got on the show, I was telling you about a little ailment that I have. And you were able to shed some light on what I can do to remedy that. And so if you could just kind of talk a little bit more, not about what we were talking about, but nutrition, not only through the food and what have you, but the impact of those kinds of things, even on our health.
Well, the body, first of all, was designed to heal itself. If it wasn't, we wouldn't be here. We would have died out, long ago. So we have to be able to heal. All we need to do is give our bodies the right resources to do that. So that's kind of number one. And, you don't put the crappiest gas in your car.
Right.
You put the best you can afford. And I'll tell you something else. When I had my health food store, now in Denmark, they don't use a lot of chemicals growing food. So it's pretty reasonably healthy. I mean, what you buy in the supermarket would be classified as, high quality organic in the States. And it's just the ordinary stuff. But I would get something like kale. Ooh. If I got it at the supermarket, it'll, you put it in the fridge, it'll last 5-7 days or so. I would get kale for my store to sell there, and it was called biodynamic, and it's like organic on steroids. They do all kinds of stuff, to help the kale grow really, really healthy. And the time of the moon that they harvested, it's quite complicated. That would last for 4 weeks in my fridge.
What about freezing it? Can you freeze kale?
You can freeze kale. It's wonderful. You chop it all up, you stick it in bags in your freezer, and then you cook it up with some potatoes and a little bit of like hairy-back bacon or something, and some smoked sausage. And you've got a Dutch dish called boerenkool, which means farmer's cabbage. And it's so nutritious and good for you in the winter.
And kale that's called a superfood.
It is. But it's a better superfood when you've grown it yourself in decent soil, or you've gotten it from a community garden or an organic source. And here's another thing. When we had the store, I fed my family from the store, and I paid the regular customer price to the store. And then I calculated, and we were eating 100% organic and biodynamic from the store. Our food budget went down by almost 30% because we didn't need to eat as much, because there was so much nutrition in the food. We didn't need to eat lots of it, and we weren't hungry all the time.
Wow. But this was in Denmark?
This was in Denmark, but you can repeat the same thing. I mean, I eat what I grow here primarily. About the only things I have to buy is things like butter and flour, because we don't produce those on the farm. But all the vegetables, a lot of the meat, eggs. I got more eggs than I know what to do with. I'll send you some. And, and I eat that food. I know where it comes from. And what I grow in a summer keeps me most of the year.
Wow.
And I just have a couple of patches.
That's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. And my grandparents did that. And so I grew up on good food like that, and cooking it nicely, not cooking it to death. And my parents traveled in Europe a lot, so they'd come back with recipes, from Italy or whatever. So we had this really kind of amazing table when I was growing up. But cooking can be fun, and so you mess it up once in a while. Just try again.
Right. And
Sorry, I'm going to
include your children.
Sorry,
That's okay.
It's not letting me turn it off. Hang on a second.
Okay.
But I don't want to answer.
Okay.
Pardon me.
All right.
You were
That's
saying.
Okay. And the other thing to that is including your children in the cooking process at an early age.
Mm-hmm.
My son, he started cooking with me when he was like 8 years old. And he's an excellent cook. He loves to cook. As a matter of fact, by the time he was 12, he was cooking dinner.
Yeah, my daughter too. And, it can be real easy stuff like, when you're baking cookies, they help you bake the cookies. And then the next time, and learn to safely use a knife. My daughter was safely using a knife when she was 7.
Yeah.
Because she learned how. And so she could help out and do small things. And then by the time she was about 10, she was cooking whole, dishes and stuff like that for special occasions.
And see, parents, engage your kids in that way. It's amazing what results you'll get from it.
It's family
Possibly
time.
even some relief from the kitchen yourself.
That too, because you learn kids have to clean up too. And
yes.
But it's family time. The kitchen is the heart of the home. So all the good conversations take place while you're cutting and chopping away.
Yes. I mean, I can't speak enough about how important this topic is for parents to take and glean from, because it's so important. So important. All right. And you know what? I've got to take a commercial break. Mm-hmm. And when we come back, we're going to deal with the piglets. Okay.
Okay.
And you're going to start with a poem. So as soon as we come back, you can start with the poem, and then we'll talk about piglets and what you meant by that in our topic. So we will be right back.
Reality today with Ms. Mac Marketing. 848-236-5026.
Ms. Mac Marketing, if you are interested in more visibility, if you're interested in possibly even being on the cover of a magazine, if you're interested in someone promoting you and moving you to the next level, then you want to contact Ms. Mac Marketing at 848-236-5026, or you can email her at msmacmarketing@gmail.com. Ms. Mac Marketing. All right. Now, we're ready for your poem.
Okay. Well, since we were talking about, family and food and all that kind of stuff, this one's called All Our Relations. I call to the hens, holding warm eggs in my hands, just as my great-grandmother did so long ago, eggs that put my mom through college. I pick the tomatoes, releasing the vine fragrance into the hot summer sun, breathing deep from the warm red skin. I hear my grandfather's voice as we counted each one carefully into a cloth-lined basket. Black plums fall easily to my touch. I reach into ripe sky, conjuring jams and cobblers with my grandmother's hands, fragrant clouds of sweetness rising in memory's kitchen. Blueberries and strawberries connecting me with my daughter, my granddaughter, ribbons of memories holding hands as we gather and trade, telling of bees and recipes. My elders taught me love for earth and her fruits. Their hearts show us the way as I feed and care in my turn, sharing our lives and lands, 6 generations connected, so the 7th may live.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And family is so important. And having feeling that sense of love. And unfortunately, we have so many families that are fractured and don't feel that, don't get that. And so that is absolutely beautiful. Does that kind of tie in with the piglets?
It does, because animals have families too, and the animals become your family, even if you do live on a farm and you eventually eat those animals. And some people are like, how can you do that? And I said, well, when we pick plants and we dig up potatoes, I suppose you could say that's killing them too. It's part of a cycle of life. The point is, do you raise that pig in horrible, horrible circumstances and beat it and do all the stuff you've seen and heard about? Or does that pig have a good life and a great wallow and lots of goodies, yummy things to eat, and be able to raise its piglets until they're ready to wean and all of those good things? And then when it's time, the slaughter is quick. We don't, do horrible things. And it's sad. It's not our favorite time of year, but we're giving to each other. It's an exchange. And so I sort of thought of piglets because we just have 5 new piglets. Our sow, Suzanne, just gave birth. She had a really rough farrowing the last time around, a twisted uterus, and we weren't sure how well it was going to go this time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, only 2 survived out of 18 the first time around.
18, wait a minute. Their litter is that large?
The litters can be that big, yeah. Well, she's a big pig. And so this time around, some didn't make it, but she's got 5 healthy little ones that are running around and, being oinky and all that kind of stuff.
Fit for the slaughter.
Well, no, they're fit for the fields now, because next week or so we're going to put them out in a big wallow in a field. We just built the fence to have a extra electric lines so that they won't get out. They'll learn. They'll put their finger and go to get their nose. But they'll have a good life, and we go out and we talk with them and hand feed them carrots and parsnips and stuff like that. It's really nice. And when they're born, we just all love it. So it's part of the deal.
That's amazing. And Tina, she's giving us some love. She's showing us some love. Thank you, Tina. Thank you very much. And I find watching animals fascinating and seeing their personalities and how they even work with and nurture their young. And that's a beautiful thing. And also, they have personalities. I remember sitting in a park one day, and there were 3 pigeons, a female pigeon and 2 male pigeons. And both of these male pigeons were vying for her attention. And it was so funny because she'd move from one to the other, and then she kind of do one of those numbers.
It's like they can't be bothered. All those men doing all that strutting. Don't we know?
Right. And then finally she just flew away. And they both literally looked at each other. I was like, oh my God. That was such a
And they can be real protective. Speaking of birds, we have some crows around here, and there's also a raven that's kind of joined the neighborhood. And those crows will dive bomb that raven, because ravens will steal eggs. And they just every time that raven comes around, there's a couple of crows just dive bombing it. So they're very,
Wow.
very protective for sure.
Wow.
And,
That's amazing. So we've talked about piglets. We've talked about poultry, pie, which was nutrition, and piglets, which are the animals that you work with on a consistent daily base. I wanted to ask you before we get into the next topic. Out of all the places that you've lived, what has been your favorite place and why?
oh gosh, I think every place I've lived has had something I really love. When I lived in Amsterdam, it was nice to be in a place that had such old houses and so much history. And there's lots of cafes, and you can have a beer or a coffee. You can bring your kids, sit outside and enjoy the sun even in the winter. It's very people's social life is outside of their homes there. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the kind of friendships, where you would meet up like that and sit and have a good conversation. When I lived in Denmark, there wasn't so much the cafe culture, but there was definitely the get together around the table, particularly in the summer. We have these really long twilights. I mean, it's still kind of light, at 11 o'clock at night. And you just sit and have good conversation and good food and, a good glass of wine and, good company. And that's that word hygge that you've seen around, they talk about hygge. That's what it means. It's that quality of comfortableness and coziness. And, it's a word that describes a lot of things. And sometimes I miss that. I miss sailing. I don't have an old boat kind of a connection here in Nova Scotia. They have the Blue Nose for sure. And I've talked to some of the crew there, and they know some of the people that I know in Europe, but I miss getting out on the water. That was always the great thing, when we turned the motor off and had the sails up and that quiet and the sound of the water on the sides of the ship and things like that. Every place has something special.
Yeah.
And I love being here in Nova Scotia because, if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes.
They say that about Ohio.
Yeah. Actually, let me dig up a poem. I've got a good poem about
And
that.
while you're digging that up, you mentioned Amsterdam. And I remember meeting a young lady from Amsterdam, and she said that there are no guns in Amsterdam.
No,
And she also said even police officers, they walk around without guns.
they don't have guns. The whole culture is about de-escalation. I think that makes a difference. Each person can have their say and then they de-escalate. And I think also they've been through a war on their own soil. I mean, when I lived there in the 80s and 90s, I had friends who had been in the resistance. I had friends who had been in concentration camps. And I had colleagues. I had a German colleague who was had been in the German Merchant Marine. And, so all sides were there, and they knew what it was like to have people shooting at your houses and shooting at you and all of those horrible things. They knew what war was. And already back in the 80s, I had friends in the Netherlands watching what was going on in American politics and say, watch out. It's a slippery slope, and this is how it starts.
And I don't think there's anyone in this country that can imagine no guns, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And to know that there is a country where guns don't exist.
Yeah. Japan's another one.
Wow.
It's, and I mean, people in Switzerland and in Sweden, for instance, they'll have guns, but they use them for hunting, not people, animals.
Not people.
And, it's like, well, why don't people just sit down and talk? Now, mind you, in those countries, there's also a very strong political sense of taking care of the common good. In other words, that well, that phrase, a rising tide floats all boats. There's that sort of feeling that, I don't lose my rights just because you get yours. There isn't that idea. And so if it isn't good for everyone, it's not good for anybody.
And you know
And
what? Why
I
can't
think
we
that
be
makes a
like
difference.
that?
Well, we can. We have to choose it.
There
We
you
have
go.
to choose it. And that's what my friends back, in Amsterdam in the 80s and 90s were saying. Be careful what you choose. Be careful what you ask for.
Yeah.
But I wanted to quickly go back to a poem about the weather. A
Okay.
safe
All
topic
right.
always.
All right. Yes.
It's called Murder on the Maritime Express. Gale force gusts rattle the windows, shake the floors, and slam the doors. The lights flicker once, twice, 3 times, and we're off grid. I do up a hot buttered rum on my camp stove, light candles, snuggle under the duvet, and launch myself into an Icelandic murder mystery from the library stack. The howling wind outside matches the blizzard inside the pages. A loose gutter claps out clues. Ice sheets explode down the steep steel roof, crashing to the ground below with perfectly timed dramatic sound effects. While victims are abandoned to frozen reaches of Arctic nights, killers and detectives circle with deadly purpose on dark glaciers, I bask in the summer-scented warmth of beeswax and Caribbean spices. By candlelight and rum, my bed rocks gently on the express train of an Atlantic storm, linking me with generations and geographies of farm dwellers huddling in warm darkness and ghost stories as snow and ice savage the night outside.
That's nice. That's beautiful. Now you are a award-winning poet. And
Yes.
And let's talk about that for a minute. And I put your email. If anybody's interested in getting her book, then you can email her and she will get you information on how you can get her book. So let's talk about this award.
Well, there's a poetry festival that's been going on for quite a number of years. It's the San Gabriel Valley Poetry Festival out in California. And I entered my book, Silence of the Bells, into the contest in 2022. And by golly, I won.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And the prize was to have a bunch of copies printed and be able to sell them. So I didn't have to go through all the self-publishing horror. And I've got there's a small press called buttnakedpublishing.com, which has our books. Right now, their website has been hacked. So the best thing is just to get in touch with me, and then I'll organize something to have the book sent out to you. And yeah, it's kind of cool to be able to say I'm an award-winning published poet. It's like, whoa.
Yes, well, that's quite an honor. That is quite an honor. And I have another commercial to play. So we will be right back.
Yep.
Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Tina J. Ramsey, and I want to share with you about CTR Media Network. Have you heard? CTR Media Network is a new standard of podcasting with over 30 plus podcasters. We reach 350 million global listeners worldwide in over 50 plus countries across all major podcasting and social media platforms. We have featured over 1,000 guests. What we specialize in is helping business owners, entrepreneurs, coaches, and fellow podcasters expand their visibility on our platform. We're all about positioning with visibility, connections, and teaching you how to monetize what you do. Let me tell you something. If you're a business owner, we have sponsorships opportunities. We have commercial slots. We also have opportunities for you to be a featured guest on any of our shows. So what are you waiting for? CTR Media Network is who we are, and this is where you need to be. So go to ctrmedianetwork.com and click our store feature so that you can see which opportunity fits your life and your budget so that we can get started working with you today.
CTR Media Network. I am so proud and honored to be a part of that network. And let me say, if you are interested in sponsoring my show or you want to advertise, then please go to Vera Thomas Show 1117 at gmail.com and let me know, and I'll send you a sponsor package. Would love to have you as one of my sponsors or to advertise with me on my show. And we have a comment coming in. All right. This says, what got you into poetry and when did you realize you were good at it? Thank you, T. Swin. How you doing? This is another one of my podcasts. Family, thank you for watching. Okay, so you want to share?
What got me into poetry was I was actually dyslexic. I didn't learn how to read until the end of second grade, and only because I had a really good teacher who just wouldn't give up and didn't make me feel bad. And then in fourth grade, we had to learn how to write a haiku. And I just loved that. And so I kept scribbling poetry over the years, and it was a way of kind of working through stuff and expressing things that might be hard in other ways, expressing hard stuff sometimes. And then during the pandemic, a writer friend of mine out in California says, well, why don't you join this Zoom group of poets and share your poetry and who knows? And so I did, and it kind of saved me, from total isolation and COVID, and I got lots and lots of great support. And they continue to support me. I'm in a couple of different groups, and, we get together once a week and do critiques and learn how to write new forms of poetry. I wrote my first sonnet. And, but I guess I didn't really realize I was good at it, if you could put it that way, until I won the competition. And then it was like, wow, people take my stuff seriously. Cool. I guess I better keep doing it.
Yes. Thank you for asking that question, T. Swin. Awesome. Now, can you believe we only have 7 minutes left? 8. Oh my God. So anyway, a little more than 7. Math. Let me stop. Okay. So the last topic in our subject is politics. Mm-hmm. And I know that you've been very involved in politics for you said since you were, 8 years old?
Yeah. My parents were ferociously active Democrats. And as an 8-year-old, I went along and helped stuff envelopes for John Kerry's first campaign. I think that was the one he lost, and then eventually he won. And a funny thing, I grew up in this kind of all-white town, but my parents were very good about telling us kids about what was going on in the world. And when Martin Luther King was assassinated, I was 10 years old, and I was really upset about it. And I was at school, I was crying, and kids asked me, what are you crying about? So I told them. Well, they had never heard of Martin Luther King.
What?
And they were very kind about it, and patting me on the back and stuff. And then the next day was completely different, because obviously they'd gone home. Their rather conservative and probably kind of racist parents had set them straight, and or straight, I put in
quotes,
in quotes, and came back. And that's when the bullying started. But I didn't change what I felt. And I helped organize demonstrations, anti-war demonstrations, during the Vietnam War. And I worked on political campaigns. And I actually met Jimmy Carter in New Hampshire. And I started voting when they changed the voting age to 18. The first election that I voted in, I voted absentee. I was up in Canada at the time. And I voted absentee in my first presidential election and voted for Jimmy Carter. And I've been doing that ever since. I've worked with Democrats abroad, helped organize in Denmark the Danish part of the first global primary, where people can vote in that primary, help send delegates to the convention, the Democratic convention, or they can, vote absentee in their state. and things like that. So I worked on the Obama campaign, and yeah, so I keep my hand in.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And a lot of times people you can't judge a book by its cover, and you can't judge, which is a part of our problem. We want to judge people and without knowing their story and without knowing their passion. And for you to have a passion for justice and have a passion for equality.
Well, I've worked with a lot of refugees. I worked as a pro bono paralegal on dead-ended refugee cases while I was living in Denmark. And, we all want the same things. We want our kids to grow up safe. We want a peaceful existence. We want food in our tummies and a roof over our head. I mean, and, most people running around the world do not want to bang other people over the head with their religion or their politics or whatever. They just want to get along with their neighbors. And when we hone in on that, we create community. And I think that's what people ache for.
Yeah.
And why it's so easy for them to get sucked into conspiracy theories is because they forget, rising tide floats all boats, and we are all human beings. And we survive by working together, not apart.
Absolutely. And, I want so badly for our country to realize that, and the beauty in diversity and in difference. Nothing is the same.
I mean, I've worked on projects, with former, the former East Germany and the former West Germany, and people from different countries and languages and all this kind of stuff. We couldn't have done the amazing things we did without all that diversity. It's the same as a garden. You need all of that in nature. And, we are this garden. So, without all these different things, I mean, imagine building a house with only one kind of hammer and one kind of nail. You wouldn't get very far.
No, we wouldn't. So beautiful. You are a beautiful soul, Rose.
Thank
You
you.
really are. And I am just honored that you have been on my show. And I do have another commercial. So here we go.
Mama Knows creates high quality products that are available to be used on multiple textures of hair. Her goal is to bridge the gap to stop people from having to use multiple products because of families with multiple hair types. Her products are currently being used on men, women, children of all ethnicities. Mama Knows products are available at www.mamaknowsproducts.com. That's www.mamaknowsproducts.com. You can also find her on Instagram at Mama Knows Products, because Mama knows what you need.
Mama knows what you need. So if you're having some hair issues, no matter what your ethnicity, you want to contact Mama Knows at mamaknowsproducts.com. And before we get off here, and before I give you the last word, I do want to remind everyone that I have a workshop coming up on this Saturday, June 3rd at noon, and we're going to be looking at misconceived behaviors. There are 21 misconceived behaviors that impact on our homes, impact on our children, impact on in our jobs, impact on relationship. And so I'm going to be going over a few of those on Saturday, and we're going to be looking at the behavior itself, the causes of those behaviors, the indications of those behaviors, and the impact, and how do we resolve some of those behaviors. You can go to my Facebook page or my LinkedIn or Instagram and register through those sites. I'm sorry I didn't put my information here, But go to my Facebook page and you'll see misconceived behaviors, or go to events on LinkedIn, Facebook, and register today. It's an hour presentation to do an overview of some of these misconceived behaviors. And maybe by attending, you may be able to resolve some areas of issues of concern that you may have when you have seen these misconceived behaviors. So thank you. I just wanted to say that. And I am going to bring you back on and let you close us out with another poem and your last words. And again, thank you so much for being here. It's been an honor having you. And I'm going to give you the last words. And I want to say to my listening audience, thank you for tuning in, whether you're listening now or later or on the podcast. But I hope you gleaned from this. And with the last words, and so I will see you all next week.
Thank you. This one is called Country Night. And it's just basically about falling asleep in the country. And you can find it in my book, my collection, Silence of the Bells. It is the night quiet I do cherish. Long pauses between owl and a lone tree frog. The lengthening moon shadowing the soft paw prints of the cat going about his night prowls. My pen scratches poetry into the gloaming, while a log settles on the wood stove with a glissando of sparks. In the nearby hills, a fox howls her witch's lament to the firmament of stars, and a mouse rustles above my head. I blow out my candles, one by one, allowing the deepness of the dark to drape threads of night around my shoulders. I let my clothing shed the day softly to the floor. My bed shimmers magic with moonlight, outlining the silken slide of my skin between the murmuring sheets. The leaves on the trees whisper secrets as a passing shower patters to itself on the roof, and ancient wisdom drops down into the rain barrel below. Breath by breath, I fall into a drowsy conversation with my heartbeat, beginning the long night journey into the peaceful realm of my dreams.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And if you want to get in touch with Rose, you can reach her through her email, rah@concordiaconnect.com. So please contact her, get her book. And thank you all for listening. And we will see you on Thursday. And Rose, if you would hold on for a minute.
The Vera and Thomas Show. 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 Let's talk about it. 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 On the Vera Thomas Show. Let's talk about it.